Hi, it's with Tassus today. Tassus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the effort and constant efforts, unceasing efforts to try and provoke hostile, aggressive actions from Russia, and the constant demonization of Vladimir Putin. To listen to some of the stuff on the mainstream globalist controlled media. You'd think that Putin was the most evil. He makes Hitler look like a choir boy. I mean, seriously. Now this is all absurd, and if you look through the usual, it's the usual tactic of demonizing somebody by by association and so on. And there's sort of a propaganda methodology about demonizing a foreign leader, for example, when they wanted to go after Saddam Hussein, the media machine cranked into gear. The rapists, pedophiles, abusers of women, and that's what these people are. They're not even human. We can do what we want to them. They're worse than Nazis now. So that was the propaganda. They're doing the same to Putin. It's the same pattern of propaganda now. Just everything they're doing or can do to provoke Putin, they're doing. And I come back to the sort of the globalist sort of international script, which is to remove all obstacles to globalization. Now, that's not just Trump in the eyes of the globalists. That's Iran and Russia. Now, there are other potential problems like Libya and Iraq, and they've got rid of those. But in the case of Iran and Russia, then there are two holdouts on the globalization project, and these have to be got rid of as the globalists see it. And they're doing everything they can to promote conflict and to try and neutralize them as obstacles to the globalist project. So now China sort of sits in the middle. China is useful in many ways to the globalists, transferring jobs there and having slave labor make shit and so on. So there's that, and then they've got more Chinese as consumers of Western goods. So there's those sort of things as well going on. So China kind of delivers to globalization one way, whilst also being a threat to it in another. Now, the idea was when they were transporting Western jobs to China is that China would become more capitalist, more democratic, or not so much democratic, more power sharing. So the Communist Party would share power with other groups. These groups would be funded and controlled by the West, it was presumed, and therefore that would create a tame, controllable China. It didn't pan out that way. Again, the Chinese are still useful to the globalists, but not. But Russia and Iran are different. Now, Russia being sort of white and nominally Christian at least, then their particular targets, Christianity is sort of identified as being very much an enemy, if you like, of globalization, certainly as the globalists see it. I wouldn't think it's as big a threat as the globalists appear to think it is, but nonetheless it is. It competes for hearts and minds, and the globalists won't tolerate that, given globalization is ideologically driven. So the globalists, Russia's it. We've got to neutralize Russia, but how do we do that? Now, Russia's got a population of I think around 140 million, and they've got a substantial military and lots of nuclear weapons and so on. I'm not sure that's per se a big issue, but they've got quite a decent sized military, and they were an extremely militaristic country before 1990. When the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union collapsed. So now their technology in some areas is quite old, but they've got quite a large navy. If they wanted to put a big army in the field, they could do it. Got a lot of artillery pieces, a lot of aircraft, and so on. So, and they're no pushover if it comes to conflict. their technology, in the overall mass, may not be as much as the West collectively has, but it's still substantial. So what is now the Russians Russian government's been quite clear. We don't want NATO directly on our borders. We don't want that. If you try and put NATO directly on our borders, then we're going to have a problem with that, and we'd rather either we all have a wider NATO that we all come in as part of, or we don't have NATO on our borders, but we're happy to talk about it. Any attempt, as far as I can tell, that the Russians have had, whether it's disingenuous negotiation or not, but any attempt the Russians appear to have made to find some sort of middle ground, it's the West who's turned their nose up at it and gone away. So again, it comes back to this thing: we need to remove the threat to globalization. That constantly comes back to that discussion, and which means the complete neutralization and knackering, if you like, of Russia and its political system. They have to become a global, they have to allow themselves to be penetrated by the globalist machine, which means, lots of race, gender, conflict, gender studies courses, LGBTQ, this, they have to have the full barrage, mass migration. It has to all be delivered into the Russian populace and political system. And until the globalists have control of the political system, as indeed they do in the US and Britain and Germany and France and elsewhere, that's the level of control they want. Until they have that level of control of the Russian political system, then as far as they're concerned, Russia is an enemy and or is a holdout to the globalization process. And Russia has control of a lot of natural resources, metals and ores, oil and gas and all sorts of things, and those things need to be controlled. Also, Russia's not playing along with the climate change agenda and all that sort of stuff, which again is very much part of the globalist shtick in imposing their ideology on all the other nations. So Russia has to be neutralized, got rid of. So they're providing, whether it's blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, whether it's trying to get Ukraine to join NATO. They're deliberately doing things that they know will provoke an angry, hostile reaction from Russia or any government in that position. They know it will be a hostile reaction, yet they do it anyway. When the Russians attempt to negotiate, they go, fuck you, we're not going to negotiate. So we need to look at the lengths they're going to. Now, I think the Ukraine war was, it was deliberately set up. It was planned and deliberately set up. And the way the entire West sort of gave money and help and all sorts of things to Ukraine means this was all planned well in advance. Maybe they didn't quite expect the Russians to act in the way they did in the time frame. They may have got that a little bit wrong, but that they wanted this reaction from Russia, and they were prepared to and psychologically prepared to give Ukraine whatever support they possibly could be given. But the Ukrainian armed forces are like 1/6 of the size of the Russian armed forces. So I think the idea was that they could then, Russia invades Ukraine, they can then claim that the Russians are the aggressor. Look, Hitler, fascist, and they could then have a propaganda victory of that, and could then more completely and more comprehensively demonize Putin and the Russian government, which was clearly their intention. And so this would give them again the control of the propaganda narrative. I don't think they handled that very well, the propaganda narrative, the globalists, but nonetheless, just having a look at that. Then there was the inevitable sanctions against Russia, which had much less effect than I think they thought it would. Where if Russia couldn't import something, they just set up factories to make it, and then went and found other customers for their natural resources, such as oil and gas, like China or India or whoever. So they didn't really lose business in the overall scheme of things. And if there was any effect of the sanctions, it was quite minimal, nowhere near the effect that the Americans thought it would have. And taking the Russians out of the international banking system meant that there's now just a parallel banking system being created. So that was utterly counterproductive in every way. In fact, if anything, globalization is now more difficult to achieve, or its universality is more difficult to achieve than it was beforehand. So the globalists hadn't really achieved a whole lot there. Now, the second thing was the view, I think, was by the globalists, was that the war with Ukraine would drain the Russian economy, would drain their military forces and fuck the economy up, having to pay for the war and that sort of thing. And if it has that effect, I mean, wars are expensive, so I don't doubt that it's costing a lot of money. But the effect it's had is nowhere near, as far as I can tell, nowhere near as much as the West was hoping for. I think they were hoping for an economically and militarily exhausted Russia after the Ukraine conflict. And so then the West would be in a position to dictate terms to Russia. You're exhausted. You've got no military capacity left. You are fucked. A bunch of Boy Scouts could come in here and take over. So, you've got no hope. You just got to do what we tell you. And, we'll go easy on you as long as you allow LGBTQ parades through the main street of Moscow, as long as your politicians do as we tell them to, the WF tells them to, then that's it. We don't need to invade you. We'll just invade you with globalist ideology. So I think that's where. But Russia's nowhere near as exhausted economically or militarily, and so there's talk by people like Emmanuel Macron in France and even a sort of a Boris Johnson, who seems to be rather firebrand on these issues. He's not firebrand over representing the people of the United Kingdom when he's Prime Minister. No, fuck them. But he's firebrand about representing Ukraine. I mean, the fucking turncoat, Jesus. So Russia's not exhausted economically or militarily, and this talk of putting together a military force to go into Ukraine, the West, is I think pie in the sky. But let's assume for the moment that it's something that grows legs. Then we can be completely confident that will provoke a wider conflict, which will be, as I see it, in no one's interest. To the globalists, they're playing this ideological game of any collateral damage is worth it if they can further the globalist project, and they can't further, as they see it, the globalist project without the invasion of complete subjugation of Russia, whether that involves military invasion or ideological invasion. They don't give a fuck, but invasion to bring Russia to heel. So they, as far as they're concerned, any collateral damage is acceptable in this pursuit, same as the collateral damage they're causing in Western countries now, where people can't even afford rent, or they can't even afford electricity. They can barely afford to put food on the table. This is just collateral damage, but is worth it in pursuit of the ideology. And same as in Cambodia, Pol Pot, and China with Mao. Tens of millions of people dying. It's quite acceptable. We're putting in a nirvana of ideology. So if millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions die, it doesn't matter. We're pursuing nirvana. We're ideological purity, and that's okay. So, and the globalists are the same. They're the same, have those same fanatical outlooks, that any collateral damage is worth it in pursuit of the ideology. So they're looking at Russia, but I don't know, and the window is narrowing. The chances of, and they're doing everything they can. Every treachery, every deceit is being used to try and stop Donald Trump from becoming president. But the chances are fairly high that he will be president early next year, and so their window of opportunity is narrowing. And they've really got to start a conflict and finish it decisively in some way before January next year. And they know this, and this is why I think they're ramping up the thing. If Trump becomes president, then he'll put a stop to the conflict, or he'll never start it. He'll go to the negotiating table rather than start a conflict where shitloads of people are going to fucking die. Again, quite acceptable casualties for the globalists. They're only riff-raff anyway. Why should we give a fuck? We're the elites. We're the gods. The hoi polloi can die in causes that suit us, but hey, what's wrong with that? So I think they've either got to move now, or in the near future, or they won't be able to, or they've got to take out Trump some other way with maybe methodologies they haven't yet dreamed up, and ones that may become increasingly ever more drastic and desperate. Let's hope not. So I think that's where we're at with the Russia thing. Now, let's suppose Trump does become president, and again, increasingly likely, and this time he's aware of how they nobbled him last time around. And so you've got the possibility of someone carrying on from Trump, in the term afterwards, maybe even holding 2 terms. And so you've got the possibility of 12 years of anti-globalist presidents, or non-sympathetic to globalization presidents. That would kill the globalist project. That would really be the end of it, I think. Certainly the end of it in its current drastic ideological radical form. But that means that their window of opportunity is now, and they have to act. So I think this is really what they're up to in Russia. But their wider options are narrow. None of their forecasts have come to pass. That Russia would be, emasculated economically. That hasn't happened. That they'd be bled dry militarily. That hasn't happened. That their weapons capability, given the sanctions, would be torn to pieces. It hasn't. That their exports would be totally cut off. That hasn't happened. That Nord Stream pipeline blowing up has been for nothing. Nothing. The Russians have, the next day they replaced the customers, if you like, for buying their gas. So that Nord Stream pipeline sabotage achieved nothing at all. It was viewed by the globalists as being, this is the kill shot. This will fuck that motherfucker up. Did nothing of the sort. So this is, I think, where we're at with Russia, but it's not no matter how you look at it, they're chasing after something that doesn't put any of us in a good place. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.